Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And today I am joined by the absolutely wonderful Melanie Reinhart. Hello, Melanie.
Oh, hello, Anna. It's always so nice to speak with you, truly.
Such excitement. And I was sharing with you that I am recovering from a cold. And my only concern yesterday is that I be well enough to make sure that this interview went ahead.
Oh, oh, we could have done it another time, but anyway, you look really well today.
I do feel very lucky and I'm very recovered. So here you are. And what prompted my invitation to you was one of your newsletters in which you were talking about Sedna going into Gemini and Uranus going into Gemini. So I guess maybe it would be good to start with Sedna. And what is she astronomically and who is she mythologically?
Okay. Well, before I even get into that, when I was checking my notes today in preparation for speaking with you, I was reminded that, we're speaking 2 days off the anniversary of Sedna's discovery. Did you know that?
I'd missed that, but wow.
I know, I couldn't believe it. Yeah, so she was discovered on the 14th of November 2003. And then her discovery was announced in March of the next year, 2004. And the naming was confirmed in September of that same year, 2004. And there is an article on my website about Sedna, which you might like to read through. And I must just say that I wrote that article and named this object by the proposed name before it had been confirmed. So the article was written in August of 2004, published in Caduceus magazine later that autumn, and then the naming was confirmed at the end of September 2004. So, astronomically first, uh, Sedna is an object um, in the inner edge of what's called the Oort cloud. That's Oort. And it's a hypothetical body about which some very interesting writing and research has been done. And amongst that, it's said to be like a massive repository of comets that come streaking into our solar system and then go out again. I personally love that idea. And if you search Sedna with Google Images, you'll see some wonderful images. The ones that appeal to me the most is they will show the solar system as a flattish plane like that. When I'm teaching about the solar system, I like to call it a fried egg. The yolk being the sun and the white being the ecliptic or the orbital plane of the planets. And so they go along more or less all in the same plane. And the Kuiper belt is a ring of matter outside the solar system, but also roughly in the same plane. And then the Oort cloud surrounds the whole thing and has what looks like streaming particles that come up and surround it so that it has a plane that's vertical to the solar system and the Kuiper belt and all of that. And just a gorgeous looking thing in space. And even the fact that it's considered to be the Oort cloud is like a repository of comets. That's also rather wonderful because in the work of Rudolf Steiner, you'll see some very interesting ideas about comets. He speaks of them as like messengers coming in from the beyond all the way into our solar system, both both bringing messages in and also accruing to its fiery tail, well, its dust and fire tail, accruing to it all of the kind of psychic debris that it finds in our solar system on its way in. And then that's kind of burnt up and transformed or thrown out to the outer reaches of space. So there is a healing implication about comets that I personally really enjoy. And of course, Chiron and the Centaurs, they are still called comets by some astronomers. And what's fun is the borders between the definitions of what's a planet, what's a centaur, what's a comet, what's a Kuiper belt object. It's all got to become a bit of a mishmash. But when you look at the overall view, that's what the Oort cloud is. So Sedna comes from there. And her orbital length is currently thought to be 11,408 years. So it's another class of object altogether. If we look back in our timeline of history, all that way, 11,000 plus years, we get to the phase which was the last ice age. And there are people today, even scientists today, who are predicting a new ice age is coming. Now, we're all told a lot about global warming and all the rest of it, but there are voices out there saying, a new ice age is coming. So it was a time of climate extremes back then, just as it's daily becoming now. So a very interesting object just in itself. You might see Sedna called an Oortoid, Oortoid, meaning like an Oort cloud object, Oortoid. You might also see it called a scattered disk object, an SDO. That's another classification of objects whose position includes having been scattered by the influence of another object nearby. So that's the astronomy of Sedna. Now, she did go into Gemini already last year and made a couple of, just looking for my notes here. Yes, so already in November of 2023, she was at 000 of Gemini. And then by 20th of May this year, 2024, she was 0018. And November, coming right up on the 22nd, she will be at 0038. So she moves incredibly slowly. Her whole orbit length is almost 12,000 years. And of course, 12 is an important number in terms of our zodiac anyway. So if you do the maths, you can see that she only moves by seconds of arc every day. But the fact she hardly moves makes it something very easy to study, because that will that will mean that twice a year, in May and November, Sedna comes into an opposition or a conjunction with the Sun. And the dates on which that happen hardly move. So it was this year, 20th of May, and will be 22nd of November. And you can use those dates for guidelines, and even by 6 or 7 years hence, it's barely shifted 2 degrees. So that's very interesting. Any of you who are interested in Sedna, do pin those dates and notice for synchronicities around those dates, which I'm sure you'll see when I was preparing to speak today with Anna. I found some of my original research notes, and they included a lot of synchronous material, including the one really big one was there was that catastrophic tsunami at Aceh in Indonesia in early 2004. That was right after the whole discovery and naming and all that of Sedna took place. And then all sorts of painful things, like there was the biggest seal hunt in the last 50 years took place on another Sedna point. And now there's so much happening everywhere in all ways that you won't have difficulty finding stuff. But I think it's common knowledge that there's a huge amount of activity around the Arctic and also the Antarctic. But Sedna is a character from the Inuit mythology that does involve specific reference to the deep sea. So I'll tell you her story now.
Such slow movement. I think maybe it might be worth mentioning how long she was in Taurus for and how long she will be in Gemini, just to help everything be clear for everyone.
Yes, so she will be in Gemini until 2067. And I'm just looking through my notes here with the date she went into Taurus, which I didn't write down. But she spends at least 40 years in one sign.
Quite a lot has happened in terms of the environmental movement in that time that she's been in Taurus.
Absolutely, yes. And you know, astrologer Eric Francis pointed out that the association with environmental issues was clearly developed while Sedna was in Taurus. And he's flagged what he calls the mental environment for Sedna in Gemini, and describes that in terms of becoming aware of the thought forms that are being pushed around in the collective mind field in which we all live mentally, and the condition of that mind field, which is as polluted as the Earth's environment, as an the mental environment is as polluted as our poor earthly environment. And I find that hugely valuable. So there, the encouragement is all about developing the discernment to see what is the mental food, as it were, going into our mental environment, how to interface with that, how to be discerning, and how to choose what to believe in, because we understand the consequences of what it is that we take to be true, or that we believe in. So those beliefs have consequences which we don't always think about. But
No.
something, this slow moving ortoid, which has specific references to the sea floor. It's not just the sea. It's the sea at one level, but also the sea floor. So where Sedna lives is the sea floor. And of course, there's been loads of stuff now about research on the sea floor. So in addition to all kinds of shipwrecks and other debris caused by us humans, there's a lot of plants that have never even been categorized. They're being newly discovered as we speak. And there are also lots of rare minerals down there, some of which also haven't been named yet. So it's a very rich world about which we really know relatively little. So perhaps it being now in Gemini, Sedna being in Gemini, that's a sign ruled by Mercury and does have a lot to do with our mental field and what's already been put in it by parents or even ancestors and parents, the conditioning that we receive during so-called socializing. And these days, crucially, what media we engage with or not, as the case may be. So it's the whole mental field from the nervous system, also ruled by Gemini. So the sensory input that comes into our nervous system interfaces with what we call the mind, that eventually will form into language and communication, and then information and how we work with information, how we generate information, how we take it in through our ears, what we make of it inside. So really an absolutely crucial sign in terms of, gosh, our mental survival in the kind of mental environment that we inhabit during these times. And so some good, sound ecological practice in our mental environment, I think, is a good consideration.
I'm also thinking of the myth of the twins, Castor and Pollux, and how that myth, I feel, really urges us to aim for a higher perspective, um, lest we should fall. It's like this warning that we need to aim for the highest intention, the highest link we can to divinity, lest we should fall from grace, if we can put it like that. And
Yes.
and so as you're speaking of that need to be selective about what we expose ourselves to, it made me think of that, because I think that's really important. You know, the environmental movement begins with good intentions and then descends into an anti-human movement. And that's not going to heal anything, because
Yeah.
it's missing the point of what is actually destroying our world, which is actually a belief system that is so materialistic, where nothing is sacred, where the sanctity of every living thing on this planet is denied, because everything is it's seen as dead. And humanity divorced from soul ceases to be something sacred. And so, hey, have a few wars, kill a few people, doesn't really matter. Experiment on them, doesn't really matter. And that loss of sanctity is at the heart of the illness. And you were talking about the mind and the lack of the toxicity of the mind, or the toxicity of the mind can only lead to toxicity in the body. And that is our physical body and our planet herself, where we are thinking nothing of, in the name of geoengineering, throwing aluminium into the air, and it's now being found in our soil and in our water table, let alone the issue around pesticides doing it. But we want to say that it's all about the car. Well, it isn't. It isn't all about the car, actually. And no, depriving people of energy is just going to deprive them of heat and warmth. It's not going to solve the issue, because the issue is somewhere else. And it's that look over here so that you're not really looking over there.
Yeah.
That deception that goes on. So maybe I think it might be good now to think about the story of Sedna.
Okay. So as I mentioned, the story of Sedna comes from the Inuit people, who live very far up north, and I believe even into the Arctic Circle itself. So we see Sedna as a young woman whose father has become impatient with her because she always rejects the suitors, or they reject her. Then she's finally coerced into an arranged marriage with a man who seems suitable. He seems elegant, he's wealthy and kind. But once they're married, he turns into a cruel raven, and she becomes very frightened. So when her parents visit, she tries to escape with them when it's time for them to go. And so they're all in a kayak, but disaster strikes when the raven realizes that she's gone. So he follows the kayak and begins to attack them. And her father is so alarmed by all of this and so afraid for his own survival that he throws Sedna out of the kayak, and she tries to hold on by gripping it with her fingers. And the father chops off her fingers, and so she drops into the sea, and down and down and down to the very bottom of the sea floor, where it said she still lives. And her fingers, which were chopped off, they became the sea creatures, which were the food for the people. And she also held the creatures down there and wouldn't give them to the humans for food when she was feeling angry. And so she had to be placated and cajoled and worshipped in order that she might release some of the animals so that the people could eat. She was also said to be a place which held the spirits of the departed in a place where they couldn't move on. And then a shaman or a medicine man had to go down and visit her in the depths of the ocean and sing to her in order that she would release the trapped spirits. And the shaman had to return. In some versions of the story, Sedna still doesn't relent, and she won't release the animals, and she won't release the spirits, and even defeats the shaman. But in the main version that I'm familiar with, he has to return to the surface, banging his drum and singing to life. And that part to me is so incredibly touching, because sometimes any of us, probably all of you watching, have been to your own equivalent of a deep, dark journey to the sea floor, where you felt as if you were drowning, or you couldn't see the light above, and you felt like you didn't know how to swim up either. But as you come up, that sense of glory, glory in life, and the banging of the drum and the singing, that's very often the mood that meets us when we emerge from a very dark passage, like described in the story. And it said that then maybe sometimes Sedna will release the creatures who feed the humans so that life may go on.
Listening to the story, it's funny, isn't it, how you can hear a story so often, and then there's a moment when lots of different strands suddenly come together. And I've just experienced one of those moments.
Okay, do say more.
Well, you know, I guess I've been doing a lot of thinking about yin and yang and the importance of both, and the vital harmonious dance that there needs to exist between the two in order for life to be, and the role that they must each play for each other, and how yin is so necessary for life, but at the same time there's a very fragile quality to that energy. However strong it is, there's also something there that needs to be supported, and how yang is supposed to offer that support, that strength to yin. And I guess listening to the story of Sedna again, what was going through my mind was how often the failure, or we see the failure of the harmony, it's just not there. The absence of the harmony, I think, is probably a better way of putting it. And so that we see, and everybody's talking about the toxic masculine, and nobody talks about the toxic feminine, and they're both there. And so listening to the story, that anger means she doesn't release what's necessary for life. This is the very essence of yin, is life. And no wonder, because the men in her life turned out to abuse and betray her. So her fathers are meant to protect their children. They're meant to put their children above their own safety. Not so with her father. He decided to ditch her when the going got rough.
Mm.
There was no mercy there. The husband, well, clearly is easily recognized as somebody who is narcissistic and perhaps even psychopathic. Um, so there we are, the two men in her life. So no wonder she doesn't want to do the thing that feminine energy wants to do, which is to give life or to create what's possible for life. And it's the shaman who has to come and sing to her. And this is the archetype of, I guess, the divine masculine or divine yang coming in and saying, I have something for you. And kind of gently holding the hand, enabling her to release. So it's just, I had not seen that before.
Right.
And
right.
it's there. And I think that story is such a story of healing, potentially, out of pain, as you said, the joy of the release when you come up from feeling like you are drowning. And that feeling of what needs to happen between the two energies in order for life to be possible. It also made me think, of course, of Demeter saying, do you know what? Nothing is going to grow until you, Zeus, you, Hades, give me back my daughter.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's that shutting down of the ability to create and give life that happens when we are very, very wounded, irrespective of whether we're male or female, because it has nothing to do with this. It's energy we're talking about, the pure yin, the pure yang, and what happens when that energy is not flowing due to trauma.
Yeah. Also, along similar lines to what you're saying there, the detail right at the beginning of the story is the father becomes impatient because Sedna, the daughter, is either rejected by her suitors or rejects them. So there's a kind of scene of mutual rejection, which starts the whole tragedy rolling, really. So in the story, at least none of the versions I've read, we're not told the details as to why she was rejecting her suitors or what it was about her that made them reject her. And so there's something there right at the beginning, you know?
And again, it makes you think of a father who's impatient to get rid of his daughter. Perhaps, he doesn't want to have to provide for her. And so he wants to pass on this burden to somebody else. And the somebody else who keeps presenting is somebody who is not going to take care of her. And she knows it and feels it. And maybe she is sabotaging it. But he is not doing what the archetype of the divine masculine is supposed to do, which is to be sensitive to the needs of those in his care. And so yes, you're right. That is a very interesting setup for what's to come.
Yeah, because, I don't know about the ancient Inuit culture, but there are plenty of cultures, and this still survives today, where there is a bride price. And so, if it was that kind of situation, the father could have been impatient because he wanted the money he was going to get in exchange for
And
Sedna.
makes me think of how the toxicity of turning what is the divine feminine into a commodity. And we look at, how we are turning nature into a commodity, how
Yeah.
we turn ourselves into commodity, our
Yes.
creations into commodities.
Well,
That is,
there's a wonderful piece of astrology here. So on the day that Sedna was announced, that was the 15th of March 2004, there was a big stellium in the sign of Taurus in which Sedna was placed. But the stellium goes Venus, North Node, Sedna, Mars. So there are the two planets that are one of the representative of the yin and yang polarity in the zodiac. And they're on either side of Sedna and the North Node, which, as a message, I love to look at the discovery charts of planets as if they were a message from the cosmos, bringing us guidance and a sense of direction or spelling out a message and so forth. And here, what you've just been saying to me is portrayed in that chart of the announcement of Sedna, And in a similar way, the announcement chart for Chiron's discovery, it has Chiron in Taurus. Also, there's more Taurus. And it's the only Earth planet in the whole of the chart. And I vividly remember early on, not so long after Chiron was discovered, in one of the first classes I ever taught about it, I remember putting up the discovery chart and just saying to the class, if this was a message from Chiron, what would it be? And someone put up their hand and said, the message is, this Earth is the only one we've got, so take care of it. It's wounded and take care of it. And so here's the Taurus signature again.
next year, we see quite a strong emphasis on yang energy. Uranus goes into Gemini. Pluto
Yeah.
will be fully in Aquarius. Saturn will be touching into Aries. Neptune is going into Aries. Only Jupiter will be going into, in the other direction, going into a yin energy of Cancer, and
Yes.
node into Pisces.
Yes.
What do you feel that says to you?
Well, because the sequence is very elegant, as I would see it. So Jupiter goes into Cancer, which is its sign of exaltation. It's very strong there. It's very strong. It's a very stable kind of energy and very feeling. Jupiter in Cancer. I mean, really. Folks who've got Jupiter in Cancer natally, it's almost as if the wateriness of Cancer, and it's the first water sign, so it's about feelings that are up close and personal. They're not necessarily huge, spread all around the universe kind of feelings. They're very immediate and personal, ruled by the moon, so to do with our daily life. And excuse me. And what brings us security, the things we rely on to give our life shape and meaning. And so Jupiter enters Cancer at the end of April, And then Uranus goes in, I think it's the end of May.
Yes, I think
So
that's
in other words, Jupiter will be already in Cancer by the time Uranus goes into Gemini. Yes, there we are. And well, we already have Sedna there. So it's a slightly similar pattern to last year around May, because at the moment, every year, Jupiter's changing its sign in May and then early June. And it'll be like that, changing signs May, June, for a couple more years before it will go, it will change signs later on in the year. But what I think about that is that, you know, there is a relationship between Gemini and Cancer, which is like, if you look at the zodiac sequentially, you could say, well, Gemini is where, Cancer is where Gemini is going. If you think of it developmentally, from fire to earth to air to water, and there is such a lot of pathos in the story of the pairs of twins, and how their deep love for each other was such that when Zeus was begged to be allowed, begged for them to be allowed to stay together, he agreed, and there was a kind of a bargain that went with it. So when Castor was killed in a battle, Pollux grieved so deeply because they were so incredibly close. Now, they did also used to fight and so forth. So it's the archetypal sibling relationship, kind of love-hate, can't live with him, can't live without him kind of relationship, but deep, deep, deep. And so when Castor was killed, Pollux begged Zeus, his father, because remember they had different fathers. One has a mortal father, one has an immortal father. And that relates to what Anna was saying about our own self and higher self, mortal self and immortal self. So, of course, what that's literally referring to in the story is it ends up with one twin dead and one twin alive. And even that is profound, because what's also implied there is our relationship with other dimensions and the friends that we have in those other dimensions. Because the older we get, the more of them we have in the other dimensions, you know. But at any rate, it's as if the sign of Cancer is where the Gemini energy is going, because really there's so much about separation in the sign of Gemini. It's where we meet duality, and almost as if we all inhabit an earth on which there is day and night. So in fact, the dark and the light, the day and the night, is written into the script of everybody's life, because this is the environment that we inhabit. Even our brains have two different halves, and most of the organs of the body are paired, not all of them, but there's a profound replication of duality on all levels, including in our thoughts and our minds. And so Gemini is also the first of the zodiac signs that has a human figure for its emblem, okay? And so we become human by how we deal with the Gemini side of things, how we learn to think, to speak, to communicate and, and write and deal with information and all of that. So to me, to see Jupiter just sliding into Cancer before Uranus goes into Gemini, I felt so touched when I first saw that. I thought, oh my God, Cosmos knows what we need. And there it is. An exalted Jupiter in the sign of Cancer provides the context into which Uranus goes into Gemini. And I also wanted to read you, this is going back to Sedna perhaps. Probably many of you watching have heard of the Sabian symbols. So it's a set of 360 symbols, one for each degree of the zodiac. And it has a very interesting history, this set. The set was originally channeled by a very famous medium called Elsie Wheeler. And it was first codified by a very famous astrologer called Mark Jones, who was contemporary with Dane Rudhyar. But it's Dane Rudhyar's reworking of the interpretations of the symbols that is just beyond belief amazing. And it's in a book called An Astrological Mandala. And it's just been re-released by Raven Press in a lovely edition. And Rudhyar's wife assisted with the editing and permissions and all of that. So it's a wonderful addition to the literature because it was out of print for many years. But let me just give you an idea of how wonderful the symbols can be. When I read mine, I have to do it very gently because otherwise everything will fall onto the floor, including the pages. So the symbol for 1 degree of Gemini. So with the symbols, everything from 000 to 0059 is the first degree because they're always rounded up because it's a movement forward to the next and the next and so on. So Sedna is now in 1 degree of Gemini. And here's the symbol. A glass-bottomed boat reveals undersea wonders. And in the interpretation, Rudhyar points about the fact that the boat is like a necessary protection for the individual on the sea of what he referred to as like the collective unconscious, And in that sense, a necessary protection. And then he speaks about the window of the mind. And if we can have in our boat, our safety boat, if we can have a glass bottom there, we can see down into the depths of our own soul without drowning by trying to get there and reach it, you see. We can see it all.
In hypnotherapy, working with clients, there are times when it is very clear that regression work will re-traumatize them.
Yeah.
Unless I can help them to step out of that memory and observe it from above. The equivalent of the glass on the bottom of the boat to look at the depth so that they don't drown. And I think that's so true, that sometimes the pain is too great for us to face whatever is causing the pain. We have to come out of it in order to be able to process it. And I think that that's a fascinating. I had read that before, I'd forgotten. It's so lovely to be reminded of that again. And it's just, it's the beauty of it, because I feel in a way the trauma of especially the last 4 years is so fresh. We need that glass boat,
Yeah,
glass
yeah,
boat,
absolutely.
be able to look into it. I was also thinking about something that cropped up on my other channel, In the Light Growing Your Soul, an interview that I did with an amazing woman who whose body is a dowsing rod,
Ah,
because she feels the earth's energy through this, through her body. And she is often called internally. It's not a phone call. She knows, she just knows she has to go to a particular part of the world
yes,
to help clear energy there.
yes.
And she was telling me something that has stuck in my mind. It was about 6 months ago that I had this conversation with her. But she was telling me that the Earth's energy grid is reconfiguring itself,
Right.
and that energy lines that we have come to rely on are disappearing, and old energy lines are reappearing. But the bit that really struck me forcibly was when she said that this reconfiguration is nearly done and all the yin energy lines are there. But what's missing is the yang lines. She's,
Interesting.
I thought that was absolutely a fascinating bit of information. And as soon as she said it, I thought of the planetary lineup that's coming, and I thought, oh, it's on the way. The yang energy that's missing, that divine masculine energy, it's coming. And no sooner had I thought it than she said, I think it will start to appear next year. And that really, I can't get that out of my mind, because the synchronicity, talk about as above, so below, it's just so powerful. And I'm hearing in certain circles where there's been a lot of activity coming from women, wanting to bring healing to the planet, etc., wanting to bring people together, that more men are turning up.
Yes,
And
yes, I've
and
been hearing that too.
that men are turning up. And I think, wow, okay, now we're in Sean, there's the possibility of a waltz here, because
Yeah.
the two are beginning to come in.
Well, I've also, along those lines, I've been thinking a lot about the forthcoming retrograde loop of Mars. So Mars will quite soon go retrograde, and it will do that on the 7th of December 2024 in early Leo. So Mars energizes anything that it touches. It's the first planet outside the Earth's orbit, and so it's an energy which helps us to express, to go out of ourselves, so to speak, and to follow through on intentions or plans. And its qualities are vitality and also a kind of protective guardianship. It's the warrior archetype, which very much has those attributes to it. The protector, the guardian. Uh, Also, the devoted servant is Mars as well, So whatever it touches when it's transiting, it energizes that, brings a sort of force to it. And normally, Mars transits are quite quick, and it goes through the signs quite quickly. But every couple of years or so, it will do a retrograde loop. And so what will happen is it'll go up to a certain point in the zodiac. Here it's early Leo, and then it will turn round, go retrograde, and it will go back into the sign of Cancer. And while it's in the sign of Cancer, on the 16th of January 2025, Mars will make an opposition with the Sun. And that's almost like the focal point of the whole retrograde movement. Then it moves back on, it goes back into Leo eventually, but it will turn direct when it's in the sign of Cancer, and then it will move on out back into the sign of Leo. Now, Cancer and Leo are ruled by the moon and the sun, respectively, the two luminaries. I love those ancient words. So they are the prime representatives in the planetary pantheon of yin and yang. And Mars is touching one and touching the other. And I always think of these retrograde loops as like sewing or mending or crocheting kind of thing. When they occur, taking in two signs. That's not the case every time. Depends, where they are in the sign. Sometimes they just go back and forth inside the same sign, but sometimes they go into one, then they're back into the previous one, and they turn around. And to me, that's like weaving, sewing, knitting, crochet kind of thing. And that's what Mars is doing. So I'm very curious about that. And Mars, that whole loop of Mars, it's actually already begun. So the beginning part, the prelude of this whole loop already started on October the 5th. And it's building up to when Mars turns retrograde and then makes a conjunction with the Sun, then goes direct, and then moves back out to the afterlude, which lasts until the 2nd of May next year, 2025. So that's a full 7 months, is that? October, November, December. Yeah, it's a full 7 months of Mars in this very intense process of energizing the luminaries, the moon and the sun, which to me fits in exactly with what you were just describing there.
Well, I think looking ahead and just considering the level of healing that is needed at this moment in time, the heart of which needs to be harmonizing, and the healing of divisions. This is not a process that's going to happen overnight, clearly.
Mm.
But I think perhaps there's a template here for something hopeful.
Yeah.
Because if I saw that there was purely just an emphasis on yang energy, I'd be thinking, there's something here that's out of kilter, out of balance again.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we have Jupiter in Cancer next year, and that the North Node is in Pisces, a sign that's very much about forgiveness. And also, they're not earth signs, they're water signs, keeping in mind the myth of Sedna,
Yes,
water
absolutely.
sign. I'm thinking maybe there's a process of healing that is going to begin, and we can engage with that by sitting in our own glass-bottomed boats and
absolutely, yes,
and seeing where the healing needs to be for each individual, because it always begins within each and every one of us.
Absolutely. And of course, I'm now reminded that next year, 2025, both Saturn and also Neptune, they will be in the very first degree of Aries. So they only, both of them only go a little way into Aries, but almost together, and certainly over the summer, they're within a hair's breadth of an exact conjunction. That doesn't become mature and exact until February the 20th, 2026. But in the meantime, both of them are skirting along in the first degree of Aries. So I want to read you the Sabian symbol for the first degree of Aries, and think yin and yang as I read this. It's not what you might expect. A woman just risen from the sea, a seal is embracing her.
Ha, ha. That's brilliant.
Isn't that absolutely amazing? It's
Well,
almost like,
yeah,
because that position is sextile to where Sedna is now for ages.
yeah.
Um, in that first degree of Gemini, where she is, it's sextile by the first degree of Aries, and the Sabian symbol almost tells her story, except that in this case, the seal comes to embrace Sedna. It's almost like a little rewriting of the Sedna story. I'm
Yes.
hearing it now. And let me just see what Dane Rujar gives as the keynote. Oh, the keynote which he gives is simply the impulse to be.
Now, yes. And that's bringing me to Chiron in Aries because I have felt, particularly in the last 4 years, that the wounding has been to the impulse to be. Because how can we be when our own bodily sovereignty comes into question? And how can we be when we're not allowed to speak without censure
Yeah,
or fear of censure, if we could
yeah,
put it like that? And that's at the heart of the division that has been created and which needs to be healed. And it's there was something else about this. It's the idea, because this theme of severing and separating has come up in our conversation. This is 3 times I'm thinking of it now.
mm.
First is Sedna, severed from her fingers,
Of
you know,
course, hands are ruled by Gemini.
and Gemini, exactly. The two brothers severed by death, that relationship severed by death. And I'm thinking about Aries and Mars, the cutting, the sword.
Yeah,
So it feels to me, and I'll be interested to hear what you think, that this is a threshold moment that requires some surgery for healing. And that what needs to be is a severing from patterns that deny the self, the sanctity of the self, the sanctity of life, the sanctity of the planet, if we are to move in greater harmony together. That's my feeling, and I guess maybe my prayer for what's to come.
yeah, yeah. I would concur with that. But I also think that almost as a prelude, um, the sense of having been made separate or of being separated from, and the grief and maybe even the fear and insecurity or meaninglessness or rage, the whole range of feelings that might be evoked in a condition of being separated from. And in the case of the twins, it was, they got separated, although they were brothers who loved each other really deeply, hence all of the emotions.
And the process of healing always has to be about integration of the shadow. And so when I'm talking about severing, I'm talking about severing from the beliefs that stop us from integrating and being able to forgive ourselves. And because that it's through that forgiveness of ourselves that we are healing the shadow, and also, I think, setting the stage for the reunion between body and soul.
Yeah, no, I do really agree with that. And you know what I also think is there's something about the notion of our shadow that was originally a Jungian term that is so much about acceptance, because so often if we become aware of shadow material or a specific aspect of our shadow, it's easy to become sort of heroic about that and think, oh my God, oh, look what a jealous bitch I am. And actually, meanwhile, I'm trying to put on a good face and look kind and friendly and all the rest of it. Meanwhile, I can see I'm also a jealous bitch, right? So the instinct is to kind of, once perceived, that thing has to be changed. So we come at it with the proverbial sword and hack around trying to change that aspect, transform it, okay, without realizing that true transformation is not up to us and our tricks, okay? It's something far deeper than that. And it's not a trick that we can play. With good intentions and a lot of commitment and so forth, we can set the stage for a transformative process to occur, but we cannot make it happen. Most of the ways in which we think we can make it happen end up being potentially traumatizing because it's an imposition on something which isn't conscious enough, isn't ripe. We haven't understood it sufficiently. We don't really know what it's about. We just give it a label, judge it as wrong, then go about trying to change it or get rid of it. So I think what we're talking about here is something way different to that. And I sometimes think, so I actually have the sun in Gemini and a few other planets as well, a lot. And reading books about Gemini or where Gemini is listed, often kind of scratching my head thinking, wow, it's like they're only writing about one of the twins. And the depth of pathos and emotion that lives in the other one, well, you only have to read the classical stories about the twins and many other examples of twin stories to get a sense of how deep that goes. And my observation is that the qualities of this other twin vary according to the individual and what their horoscope looks like. And it will usually be between water and earth, and a mix of that combination as to what that looks like. And it's a very deep level of self-acceptance, which is invited with Gemini. And you know, in terms of the esoteric astrology of Alice Bailey, the esoteric ruler of Gemini is Venus, because that's the field, if you like. Gemini is the field where we are dealing with opposites on every level. And they both have to be included in some way or another for our consciousness to develop. And that's at all levels, especially when we go to discern that at work in our inner worlds. That's where the process of inclusion becomes hugely important. And
that brings us to the North Node in Pisces, the very sign of Venus's.
Venus's exaltation, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. The other thing, you know, related to what you were saying earlier about the yang energy. So, as I mentioned, the whole of next year is both Saturn and also Neptune going along in the very first degree of Aries. So, at one level, the first degree of Aries and the rest of the sign following, that's ruled by Mars. And we could say, well, that's the youngest of the yang in many ways. But as we've seen, there are all kinds of nuances with that. Now, whatever Neptune touches, potentially it refines, raises the vibration of, broadens the heart energy of. And yes, it's also true that chaos quite often accompanies Neptune. But my sense is that very often that's the fallout, the side effect from a process of refinement and of shifting levels that we might be going through. So I'm very curious as to what that might look like in terms of the yang principle, both in people who were born as a biological male and other places where one sees that yang energy. Saturn's also there. Last night, I think I heard on the radio one example of what we do not want, which I'll say briefly, not to give it too much energy. There's a huge move afoot in the UK to like boost the percentage of GDP that are put towards defense. And a huge defense budget coming up with all kinds of implications and strings attached and so forth. And this would be a risk that as one becomes more vulnerable, fear can set in, and then there can be a much more aggressive or defensive stance that can come in. And I think we probably will see at least some of that in the politics. But I think perhaps also the positive results of the transformation, indeed, of the whole yang principle, I think we will also see that. That would be my sense.
And I think that we've not been talking about things at a mundane level. We've been talking about things at a much deeper and higher level. There is the potential for the idealization of war with Neptune in Aries, and you know, keeping in mind that the American Civil War, Neptune was in Aries. We know what the potential is here for things to go badly wrong. However, there is enough here to make me hopeful.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that that is is really important, that
Absolutely.
there is enough here to make me hopeful.
Yes, and you know, during the week of the elections in the USA, I was kind of looking out for other omens and other signatures and so on, because it was such an all-engulfing event, you know. And so it was that very week that the extraordinary cathedral in Paris, Notre Dame Cathedral, which was almost completely destroyed, not completely, but it was pretty much burnt to the ground in April of 2019, they were able to send round to their supporters the notification that the first public mass to be held in the newly renovated cathedral will be on December the 8th this year. And December the 8th in the Catholic calendar, that's the symbol of, that's the day of the Immaculate Conception. It also fulfills a promise made by France, Macron, that the whole renovation would be done in 5 years, which was just an unheard of, unimagined short space of time for such a massive undertaking, and they've done it. And the story of how it was done, if any of you feel like some inspiration, do look it up on YouTube. There's loads of videos about the extraordinary people who did this. You know, started out with one of the most famous cathedrals in the world, and its spire falling off. You know, the spire is a yang symbol, was broken and it fell down. And people wept in the streets, thousands of them. And they had a team of over 1,000 artisans, carvers, sculptors, weavers, all kind of people from all over France and wider, I think, even. Thousands of people were involved. And when you see the videos of them working, it's like you can see the devotion and the sense of gravitas there, that they know the importance of what they're doing. And to me, the whole thing is such a beautiful metaphor. So to be working away at the little bits of what we're doing, maybe never knowing whether we'll finish on time, etc., but to be working for something precious, even if we can't imagine it at the time. It's the quality of devotion, and that will be South Node in Pisces through next year as well.
What a beautiful way on which to end our conversation. And thinking of December the 8th makes me think of Advent and your 12 holy nights. So,
Exactly.
Melanie, tell us about your 12 holy nights and how people can join.
Okay, so the 12 holy nights are literally just that, the 12 holy nights. And there is an astrological retreat process which anybody can do. And there are loads of instructions on my website. The easiest way is if you go onto the page called Events, and you just scroll down to the bottom section of the page, there's a little section on the 12 Holy Nights with lots and lots of links. And you can also find that by looking for the Zodiac Gallery on my website. It's a tab, you can go in there. And I'll be featuring it in my next newsletter. But basically, it's a way of taking one sign of the zodiac per day as a focus for your contemplation, your meditation, perhaps your journal work, or if you're a painter, your painting. If you're a writer, your poems or your stories, just taking that space to be immersed in that sign of the zodiac and see what it brings for you, you know. The method I was taught was that you begin with Capricorn. That means you move through the whole sequence in a forward direction and you end up with Sagittarius. So you're moving from a planet which is often very linked with the past to a planet which is very, very future oriented. And there are other ways to do it, but that's what I usually do. And so you can kind of design your own retreat. That's the beauty of this. And you can do it in any way that works for you with your life. And so I've done it every year for more than 20 years now. And I've deliberately experimented. So I've done everything from going totally monastic, where I don't see any friends, I don't speak on the phone, I don't do emails, I don't do anything like that. And I take a formal silence for most of the time, and I'm completely alone. I've done that. At the other end, I've experimented to see how doing the 12 Holy Nights might fit with a much more busy and active kind of Christmas, you know, going out, buying presents, having big Christmas dinners, spending time with friends or family, etc. That works too. You just have to be canny about the way you design the structure so that it will hold the process for you and that it will mix okay with your life. And that's especially important for those of you who've got caring responsibilities for children or grandparents or both, you know. So it works no matter how you do it if you set it up right. And it can be amazing. So every year after it's all finished, I offer a little check-in group, which I always enjoy very much. And that's for anybody who's been doing this process and who would like to get together with some other people who've also been doing it. They've been doing it either on their own or with friends, you know, both work fine. And we get together and have a little debrief and comment and sharing. And that's always lovely because people do such creative things. My goodness, you know. Every year I'm so touched by what people bring. So that's the 12 Holy Nights, and it'll be here as soon as we can think about it almost, you know.
Yes, before we know it. And I highly recommend this beautiful process. I have done it for 2 years myself, and I found that I see the signs in ways that are different and fresh, and my understanding of them is deepened each time. So I thank you for introducing me to this beautiful process, Melanie.
Oh,
And
you're welcome.
I'll be sure to be putting a link to your website and to it all on in the description box. And if people want to find you, how do they do that?
So my website is just my name. That's melaniereinhart.com. And you can see on the left-hand side sidebar, there's a place where you can sign up for my newsletters if you'd like to. They're just occasional. I don't write, you know, like every week or every couple of weeks, just as and when. But it's easy to find.
Perfect. I'll be putting a link to that in the description box. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at Juno and maybe even Lilith. Until then, Goodbye.
Bye bye, everybody.